In this video tutorial, we're going to take a look at this, a dramatic headshot retouch and how to do it. Stick around and check it out. As usual, it begins with a good raw file, and I'm going to have this raw file available for download down in the description of the video. In fact, I'll rename it right now and call it Drama Headshots. And there'll be a link to this DNG file down in the description to this video, like I said, and you can download it and follow along with this. If you have your own raw file, you can follow right along as well. Just remember, some of the settings are probably going to be a little bit different. So we're going to begin by just taking this file and dragging and dropping it into Photoshop. And what's going to happen is the Camera Raw editor is going to open, as we see here. Now that we have the Camera Raw editor, we want to go ahead and just kind of cool the image down. There's a lot of orange going on, so I'm going to take the temperature slider and slide it back maybe to about 5500. That looks good. I want to also introduce some green. The skin looks a little bit too red. I would rather introduce the red later on via a curves adjustment layer. We're going to cover that. So what I'm going to do to get rid of some of the reddish magenta colors is drag the tint slider over pretty drastically, maybe about -60. That looks good, a nice uniform number. I'm going to boost the contrast up about plus 20-ish, and I'm going to reduce the black. So I'm going to drag the blacks up to about plus 20 right over here on the slider. We'll drop a little bit of clarity in here as well. That just gives a bit of a mid-tone punch. And I want to drop the vibrance a little bit as well. So maybe about -20 on the old vibrance slider. So next, after we do that, we'll jump over to the tone curve tab. You may be seeing the parametric tone curve. No worries if you do. I prefer to work with the point curve. You have a lot more control, and it's just kind of like the more advanced way to go if you're picking up what I'm putting down. What we're going to do here is just drag up the bottommost dot down here, and that's going to infuse this faded, low contrast, black boosting boost into our image. Great, so we've got that. We'll get back to sharpening in a moment. Let's come over here to the Hue, Saturation, Grayscale tab, and we're going to mess around here just with the saturation and brightening tabs. What I want to do is boost the saturation of the reds about plus 20, and also do the same with the orange, so about plus 20. I got plus 23, that looks good. And we're going to lighten this up too. Primarily, it's lighting up the light side of his face, the already brighter, the non-shadow side, if you will. So we're going to take that to about plus 20 in the red brightness, and also plus 20 or so in the orange brightness. It doesn't have to be exact, and again, every image is going to be different unless you downloaded the raw file and you're following along with me. Then you can try to do exactly what I have. We're also going to go over here to the split toning section, and what I want to do is, first off, boost the balance to about plus 85. This is going to take away some of the power, if you will, of what the shadows can do, because we're primarily weighing our split toning to affect the highlights. So when we affect the shadows, when we change the shadows, it's going to be a bit more subtle than normal. So we're going to drag the hue over here, somewhere in the blues, right around 260 will probably work great for us, and we'll just boost the saturation, maybe to about plus 10. It's going to give us a nice blue fade for the shadows. And before we, didn't want to zoom in. And before we take it back into Photoshop, we're going to throw some pre-Photoshop sharpening on. So I'm over here in the sharpening tab, and I'm just going to go to about 100, something like that. You can zoom into 100% and see just what it looks like. And that looks good. We're going to add a bunch more sharpening in Photoshop anyway to really bring out the details. I'm opening this as a smart object. You can open it as a smart object, or you can open it as an image. Holding down the Shift key will change that. I'm going to go ahead and just choose Open Object. And it's going to take a moment to open it in Photoshop. And here we have it in Photoshop, so not too bad. Now, the first thing we're going to do is go over this and get rid of some of the blemishes. There's an annoying flyaway hair there, and maybe here on the head, a couple things like that. So it's really easy to do this. You create a new layer. We're going to name the layer Blemishes, and I'm going to grab the Healing Brush tool, not the Spot Healing Brush, but the Healing Brush tool, and I'm going to choose Current and Below from my Sample drop-down menu. Now that I have that, I'm going to, I'm going to zoom in before I Alt-click to define a point, and you hold down your Alt key, select a bit of skin that has similar texture, and then just go ahead and paint away whatever you're looking to paint away. I am using a relatively hard-edged brush. You can see hardness is at 90%. I don't want tons of softness. I think, and I've noticed that it tends to destroy some of the true texture of the skin. So at 90% hardness, I preserve a lot of those edge texture details, but I have just a little tiny bit of blending as well with the pixels around it. So I'm going to Alt-select there, and I'm going to paint away that kind of annoying hair there. There's like one little bloody spot there where something got cut. Great. And then I'm just looking for larger dimples, things like that, and just, kind of wiping that stuff out. Not doing a huge amount of retouching, but what I'll do is I will speed up the video at this point, and I will see you guys in just a moment. All right, great. So we have gone ahead and eliminated the blemishes that we want to get rid of. There might be one little spot on the nose there that I would like to touch up just a touch more now that I'm just backing out. That's good. All right, cool. So now that we've done that, we're going to brighten up the eyes, add a little bit of light and color to the eyes. We're going to do that by adding a curves adjustment layer. We're going to go layer, new adjustment layer, curves. I'm not going to name it anything. And we're not going to do anything with this curves adjustment layer other than change the blend mode to color dodge. So we're giving it like this crazy, solarized, bazooked out effect. And we're going to fill the mask here with black. So I'm going to select the mask and hit Command or Control I to fill it with black. I am noticing some blemishes out here. Let's actually touch those up real quick. A couple little spots from the sensor. I'm going to grab my healing brush. I'm just going to paint over them. Oh, that looks bad. Sometimes when you have one big area and it's kind of solid colored like this, it's nice to have the clone stamp tool. We can do the same thing with the clone stamp tool by choosing sample current or below. And I don't really care if the brush is all that hard or not here. Let's go ahead and just sample there. Boom, paint that away. Boom, paint that away. And paint that away. Cool. There we go. So just a couple little spots on the sensor that I noticed. All right, let's get back to what we're working on. Over here with the color dodge curves layer, I'm going to select the mask, and I'm going to zoom in on the eyes. And what we're going to do is grab the brush tool. I'm going to set the opacity of the brush tool right up here to 10. Bam. Got it to 10. I'm going to right-click now, and I'm going to reduce the hardness of my brush to 0%. And I'm also going to reduce the size, maybe to about 25 pixels for this image. And then I'm just going to begin painting with white over the colored portion of the eye, just so as to bring out some of the color there in the center of the eye. I'll intensify the highlights, things like that. That looks good. It's really going to give the eye some good shape. And we'll also just paint a quick swath of highlight on either side of the iris as well. Right, so just like that, just like that. Be careful. The darker the image gets, the more 10% opacity might actually seem like it's too much. So just be wary of that. If you need to reduce it to like 5% opacity, by all means do that. So we'll zoom out. We'll do a quick before and after. There's before, there's after, and you can see we just infused just a little kick of light into the iris part of the eye. Now what we're going to do is add another curves adjustment layer simply to add a little bit more red to this image before we move along. Because I'm starting at this point, now that we've kind of taken care of blemishes, I'm beginning to look at the tone of the image, and I want to make this look interesting. So let's go ahead and grab a curves adjustment layer. You can open up the adjustments panel, window, adjustments, and choose the curves icon. Now here in the curves adjustment, we're going to make one little thing. You might be asking, why won't I make that change here on this curves adjustment layer? Well, number one, we have a big mask that's covering up everything except the eyes. But also remember, we have the blend mode of color dodge, and we don't want this to be color dodge. We want this to be straight normal. We're going to choose from the channel dropdown the red channel, and all I'm going to do is throw some red in the highlight parts of the image. Very subtle. So there's before, there's after. We're just kind of taking away some of that cyan. In fact, I'm going to pull some of the cyan back in the shadowy parts of the image. So we're just adding red to the skin and to the highlights. Great. Subtlety is key. And now that we've done that, all we need to do is add well, not all we have to do. The next thing that we have to do, I should say, is add a high-pass sharpening adjustment to this. So we're going to merge all of our layers to a new layer by using the secret hotkey, Control-Shift-Alt. That would be Command-Shift-Option on the Mac, and the letter E. You can see we've merged all of our layers up to a new layer. In fact, I'll just name this layer High-Pass, just because we can. Next, I'm going to use the hotkey Control-Shift or Command-Shift-U to desaturate it. Wipe all the color out. And we're going to go Filter, Other, High Pass. And I want a decent high pass. I'm going to boost the radius to about 3.0. You can see we're really pulling a lot of texture out of the skin. Actually, that might be a little bit too much. Let's try 2.2, something like that. There we go. It's a little better. I don't want a crazy amount of haloing around like the edge of the Google Glass, something like that. Hit OK to commit that change. And we're going to set the blend mode here to overlay. So overlay is going to give us a nice kick of sharpening. You can see there is with high pass. That's without high pass. With high pass, we're just really extracting more detail and depth. The next we're going to do is a little dodging. Not dodging and burning. I don't really have any interest in doing burning to this image. It is a primarily... Not really primarily. The shadows play a large role in this image, and I want to kind of preserve the organic nature of the shadows, and I don't want to mess with them with dodging and burning. I just want to do some dodging to bring out the highlights a little bit more and really give them like a ripping crispness. So I'm going to do that by adding a curves adjustment layer. Again, I'm not going to do anything to the curves adjustment layer. I'm going to set the blend mode of the curves adjustment layer to screen. You can see how it's just giving us this blast of light. Again, I will select that adjustment layer mask and hit Command or Control I to invert the color. therefore making it black. All right, we're going to grab the brush tool again. I'm going to leave the opacity of the tool at 10%. I'm going to here right-click, and I'm going to boost the size of the brush, maybe to a couple hundred, maybe more like 300 or 400. There we go. And I'm just going to start gently painting into the highlights. I'm going to look here at the highlights on the hair, right? Bring out that highlight a little bit more. That's great. We've got this little highlight running down the nose. You want to be cognizant to sort of reshape your brush or resize your brush. I'm sorry. You can right-click and size, or you can use the bracket keys as you work here to really get good good dodging patterns, stuff that doesn't look just big and soft and really, really bad. Go ahead and lighten up that edge of the lip, has just a little bit of light. And then down here on the chin, we're going to add a little bit more. So it almost looks like his skin has become a little greasy because of the dodging. So there was before, there's after. You can see we've really brought out those highlights quite a bit. Now what we're going to do is merge all the layers together again, and we're going to darken the image a bit. So this is kind of a cool little trick. Merge all the layers again. Remember, Control, Shift, Alt, or Command, Shift, Option, E. And I'm just going to name this layer Multi because we're going to set this layer to the blend mode of Multiply. This sort of has this really rich, enriching and rich property when you set a layer, a single copy of the image, to the blend mode of Multiply above what you're working on. Now, obviously, this is just way too much. The effect is way too strong. We're going to reduce the opacity to about 40% or so, just like that. So you can see there's before, there's after. We're just beginning to add richness and depth and really allowing these shadows to play along the side of his face. Next up, we want to add some color to the Google Glass, because right now the Google Glass is kind of hanging out there, and while it is completely translucent in real life, I want it to really show in the image. So we're going to first thing zoom in on Google Glass, and this is actually going to be relatively easy to do. We're just going to take the polygonal lasso tool and make a selection around the Google Glass. It's a very straight-edged object, so it's fairly easy to get a good selection of it rather quickly. As you can see, we're just pulling this together. And boom, we've got a selection. Now that we have that selection, we're going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer. When you add a hue saturation adjustment layer and you have something selected, it's automatically going to mask the hue saturation adjustment layer or any adjustment layer to within the selection. So let me give you an example. We're going to hit hue saturation here, and check this out. If I boost the brightness, it's only boosting the brightness of exactly what we selected. Obviously, we don't want to do that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this on to colorize it. We're going to boost the brightness a very little bit. I'm going to boost saturation, and we're going to make this like a nice a very deep blue, but I'm gonna desaturate it a little bit here, and I'm gonna brighten it as well. To really get a good brightness and maintain contrast, we're going to need to add a levels adjustment layer, as well. So we're gonna do that by Command or Control clicking the mask for the hue saturation adjustment. See, it's gonna load that same selection, and now we're gonna add a levels adjustment layer. We're going to pull back on the white, right? So we're brightening it up, and then we're going to pull up on the black. This is going to maintain brightness, but give us good contrast as well. So you can see there's before, there's after. We're just making it really look crisp and sharp like you would expect glass to look. So again, there's before, there's after. So we've got a nice blue hue for our bit of Google Glass. One thing I want to try is just duplicating this highlight intensification curves adjustment layer. I'm going to hold down my Alt key. There'll be Option on the Mac, and I'm going to click and drag on that adjustment layer and drag it up to the top of my layers. You can see we have just really intensified those highlights to the point where I don't really like it anymore. So we're going to try this. We're going to select the mask. You can hold down Alt, the Alt key, that'll be Option on the Mac, and click on the mask to see exactly what's in the mask. And now that I'm looking at the mask, let's blur the mask a bit by going Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and maybe blur it, I don't know, 55 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. You see how subtle it's going to make a lot of it. So hit OK. Let's hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the mask again to get out of that mask alpha channel mode. And you can see there was before we blurred, there's after we blurred. It's still a little bit too strong though, so just reduce the opacity and dial the effect back until it looks just right. So there's before, there's after. We're just giving it a little bit more intensity, and I kind of like it. Now, since we've gone ahead and colorized the blue Google Glass, I also want to add, I know this is the camera, but to add a little bit more drama to this headshot, let's make it look like a laser or something is coming out of the little camera face. So we're going to do that by creating a new layer, right down here, new layer, and I'm just going to name this, actually I'll name it Starburst, although we're not really going to make it look like a starburst, but I'm going to stick with the name now that I've picked it. I'm going to zoom in on this. Actually, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to grab the brush tool. I'm going to right click. I want to make the brush huge. 700 pixels is not big enough. I'm going to try 1350. Probably actually has to be a little bit bigger even. So let's go 1700 straight on. There we go. Hardness of 0 is great. We want to set the opacity of the brush tool back to 100%, and we want to make sure our foreground color is white. Then go ahead and just click one single time to place this large white just dot of light. We're going to duplicate this layer by hitting Command or Control J. So we've got starburst copy. And with this starburst, I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and we're going to make this a little bit smaller by holding down our Shift and Alt key. That would be Shift and Option and dragging a corner anchor handle inward. Now, our little brightness is being cut off, our burst of light here is being cut off at the top of the document, but I think it's so subtle at that point you're not even going to notice it here with the smaller burst in the center. So I'm going to allow it to stick. I mean, you sort of can notice it. Maybe what we'll do is we'll bring up Command or Control T to free transform, and we'll rotate this around a bit like that. To sort of hide it and make it look like as it gets down in front of his face, it has sort of a weird cutoff, and we can work with what we've got there. That's cool. We're going to shut the starburst copy layer off, and we're going to colorize the bottom starburst copy, or the bottom starburst layer, by going Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. I don't really want to use an adjustment layer here. I want to apply this effect directly to this burst of light. So we're going to choose Colorize, and we're at solid white right now. So the first thing we need to do is make it a little darker so we can see the color. I'm going to crank the saturation way up. And then again, just like the Google Glass, I want to go with like a nice teal or bluish, maybe light blue, teal, aqua type color like that. I'm going to make it a little bit brighter. There we go. That's cool. And right around near, I don't know, somewhere between 90 and 100% saturation looks great. Hit OK. And we can turn the first starburst color back on, and you can see that the colors interact a little bit. We want to make them interact more, though, with each other and kind of blend into the image better. So I'm shutting that off, the starburst copy. That's the white burst. I'm working with the blue burst, and I'm going to change the blend mode to screen. You can see already we're seeing it kind of reflect off Google Glass. Great. I'm going to reduce the opacity a bit. Make it a little subtle. We just want that colored wash coming from our light. About 70-80% opacity looks good. I'm going to turn the white starburst copy layer on, and I'm going to maybe move it up a little bit more to center it a little bit more above the actual Google Glass camera. And now what I'm going to do is set this blend mode to linear dodge add. The cool thing about linear dodge add is when you're working with bright colors and bright lightness values, using the fill opacity really allows that linear dodge add to interact really well with contents of the layer beneath it. So it really looks like it's glaring out of that Google Glass camera. The last thing you may want to do to both of these layers is go filter noise, and just add something like, I don't know, 5% noise. Make sure uniform and monochromatic are ticked. Hit OK. Adding noise, and you can just go filter add noise again here. Adding noise to stuff like this just tends to reduce some of this banding that you're starting to see already, and generally allow it to blend a little bit better with all of the layer photographic content around it. So next up, we really want to increase what I like to call the thickness and grit of the image. So we're going to select this topmost layer, and we're going to go Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and choose a black and white adjustment layer. With this layer, we have all of these options here to work with our different color channels, from red to green to magenta, blue, yellow, everything. We got it all lined up in front of us. We're going to set the blend mode of this layer, however, to multiply. And just like before, you can see that this multiply blend mode gives us this really rich and gritty effect. It gives the image this sort of thickness when you're looking at it. I don't know how else to describe it, but this is not necessarily what I want. Obviously, we need to reduce the opacity because it's a little bit too dramatic, a little bit too extreme. But I want to see what happens if I start playing with these sliders, because like I know there's a lot of yellow and a lot of red in his skin. So if you can see if I brighten the red, you see what it does to his skin? Isn't that crazy? But let's do this. I'm just going to reduce the reds down to about -15. And I'm going to set yellows. I'm going to crank them up to maybe right around 180 or so. Greens I'm going to boost to about 60, 70, something around there. Cyan I'm going to push way up. Let's try 135, 140, something in that neighborhood. I got 142. That looks good. I'm going to boost the blues to about 70-ish. That looks good. And magentas, I'm also going to crank up a little bit. There's actually not a ton of magenta in this image, so I'm just pushing this up here, and it's going to push up some of the brightness where there is magenta. All right, great. So you can see That's before we put the multiply black and white layer. That's after. Obviously, that's a bit too much as far as the effect is concerned, so we take the opacity slider and knock it back to 40%. Actually looks pretty good. So there's before and there is after. Let's do a quick complete before and after before we move on. I'll scroll down to the bottom. Holding down Alt or Option, you can just click the eyeball of a single layer and hide all other layers except that one. There's the image we started with. Good image. And here we've been adding drama and really intensifying the mood and the light quality here in our image. All right, we're going to try to boost the highlights even a little bit more. This is a cool little trick. You can use the selective color adjustment layer by going Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and Selective Color. And what you can do is choose the whites from the colors drop-down menu here. And just instead of increasing blacks and killing off your whites, you can decrease black, which is going to intensify the white. I don't know if we really need to intensify the white all that much here, so we're just going to do it a very tiny little bit. There's before, there's after, with a selective color adjustment layer. That is a nice little trick just to keep in mind. All right, now what I'm going to do to really kind of set this off is work the color balance, the color grading. And we're going to do that with, you guessed it, a color balance adjustment layer. That's Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Color Balance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the shadows. So here in the shadows, we're going to start by pumping in some more cyan. So I'm going to set that to -5. With very subtle adjustments here. We don't want to go too crazy. I also want to dump a little bit more magenta, so I'm just going to go -2 on the magenta slider. And I want to bring some blue into the shadows, not yellow. So I'm going to go like +3 on the blues. That's cool. Let's go over to the midtones now. In midtones, I want to boost the red in the midtones. The skin here is falling very much so in the midtone range. So I want to make sure I get good yellow and good red in the skin. So I'm going to go +5 with the red. I'm going to drop some of the green out. So I'm going to maybe go -3, sliding toward magenta. And also I want to, well, you know what, actually, now that we've done that, maybe we'll push a little bit of blue to offset the red, because after all, our light and everything here is blue. So we're going to dump a little blue in there and let the red and blue fight it out. Lastly, we're going to go to the highlights, as you may well have expected, and I want to punch some good cyan into the highlights. So -8, -10, we'll probably just say, something like that. I'm not going to mess with green or magenta. I don't really like what either of those are going to do for me here in the highlights drop-down sector of this, but we will get rid of some blue in the highlights. So we're going to make that maybe like -10. That's maybe a little bit too much yellow. -5. I kind of like that. Just adding just a kiss of yellow to the skin. All right, I'm going to throw the properties panel right over here. And we're almost wrapped up. All I would suggest you do is zoom in on the image and check to see if you want to add any more sharpness to it. What we'll probably do here is add some sharpness just by way of another high-pass sharpening layer. So Control-Shift-Alt, that'd be Command-Shift-Option-E to merge all the layers to a new layer. Remember that trick. And then to desaturate, Command-Shift or Control-Shift-U. Boom, desaturate. We're going to go Filter Other, High-Pass. And here we will probably push up to like 3.5, something like that. That looks good. And we'll just set the layer blend mode to Soft Light. If we zoom into 100%, we can see that there's a lot of detail being pulled out of the skin. There's without our soft light adjustment layer. There it is with. And if you think it's too intense and maybe adding an element of hyper realism, you can always scale back the opacity, which I think I'm going to do here to about 50% or whatever works for your particular image. Remember, every photo is going to be a little bit different. All right, lastly, one of the things a lot of really good retouchers do is add a finishing layer of grain. So I'm going to show you how I like to add grain. I like to add one new layer, and I name it grain. That's right. And then I go edit, fill, and I fill it with the contents of 50% gray. Boom, covered my image with 50% gray. Next, I'm going to go filter, noise, add noise. I make sure uniform is selected and I check on monochromatic. Now that I've done that, I'm going to increase the amount to maybe like 25. I want it to be a very noticeable amount. Hit OK. I'm going to zoom in on my image. Almost to, oh, I'm at 100%. That's fine. I'm going to set the layer blend mode now to soft light. Once I've done that, you can see that I have all this grain that I've just added. It's way too much grain, but it also doesn't necessarily look very organic because it's all the same size. So in order to combat that, what I do is duplicate this grain layer by hitting Command or Control J. Zoom out just a little bit more. And then I'm going to hit Command or Control T to free transform, and I'm going to zoom this grain. I'm going to enlarge it. So I'm going to set the width and height percentages here, my free transform control panel, to 200%. 200% on both accounts. Go ahead and hit the check icon. It's going to take a second to do that because that's a huge amount of grain. But one of the other things that it's going to do now, if we look at this grain layer, well, I'm just going to free transform this layer again. I'm going to go edit free transform. Yeah, edit. There it is, free transform. It's hiding from me. See all this extra grain out here? This is like an image and a half worth of grain that's just being wasted and adding to our file size. So let's get rid of that extra grain. Here's how we do it. go ahead and go select all. Note the hotkey, Command or Control A. And now we're just going to duplicate this layer. But when you use Command or Control J to duplicate, all it does is duplicates what's selected. See, if we go back to free transform now with our new grain layer, so you notice layer 2 over here, a new grain layer, we go free transform, we've only saved that bit of grain in the middle. So all that's left to do is grab this grain copy layer and drag it to the garbage can. Oh, by the way, check it out down here. Our image right now is 1.4 gigabytes. Let's get rid of this grain layer and see if it reduces any. We get rid of that and it goes down now below a gigabyte. So that's great. All right, so we still have way too much grain, but at this point it's really easy. We just reduce the opacity of the different grains down to what we need to make it look realistic and have it blend together. So I'm gonna go about 15% or 20% or so on the big grain, and on the small grain, I'm also gonna go right around 20%. And that is it. We've gone ahead and retouched this dramatic portrait in Photoshop using a few different techniques that I love. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure you go check out the website. That's www.tutvid.com for more free Photoshop and video tutorials. Hey, wait, stop. Before you click away from this video, I just want to remind you, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit that little like button. It helps this video go up. And going up is what I like. That's what we want to do. If you also have a couple more seconds, go ahead and leave a comment. That's cool too. That's it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, check out either of these two videos right here for more of the stuff that I do. This hand is weird. Right there. Thanks, guys.